Good morning. I'm Philip de Wet, the foreign editor for News 24, and this is News 24 Live today, talking with the Russia's ambassador to South Africa, Ilya Igorovich Rogachev, in a new series that we've just launched called Africa and the Great Powers. We want to talk to the large countries, the large blocs that define so much of Africa's destiny. We want to hear from them what their intentions are towards the continent, how they interact with the continent, and in this case, particularly, whether the continent of Africa can trust Russia. And we're starting with Russia because it's perhaps the most enigmatic and poorly understood of these great powers, a power with a great deal invested in Africa politically, perhaps not always economically compared to some of the other major powers, and a country that we don't speak to often enough, we don't think. So today, we've invited the ambassador to come and talk to us for a quite a frank conversation about Russia's recent history, both in the continent and beyond, and what that means for everyone who needs to make these kinds of decisions. Russia has very good relations with a large number of countries, but the geopolitical world is changing around us all of the time, and there's a lot of jostling at the moment. So, Ambassador, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us
today. Good morning.
Good morning. There are very many things that I want to talk to you about the African continent as a whole. But I really want to start off with South Africa, and specifically what happened when President Vladimir Putin was last due to visit South Africa. We had President Cyril Ramaphosa telling the courts in South Africa that he feared that Russia could declare war on South Africa should it execute the warrant of the International Criminal Court and arrest President Vladimir Putin. Would that have happened? Is that something that he should rightfully have feared? Is Russia the kind of partner to South Africa which, if wronged, will declare war on South Africa?
Good morning, listeners. I was about to promise you at the beginning that I will try to help to solve you the enigma, as you put it, about Russian politics in Africa. But I'm afraid that the first of your questions pertain mostly to the domestic affairs of South Africa. I can tell you just that the parties agreed to follow the track that seemed to be the least problematic of all possibilities, and that's exactly what happened.
Well, put it this way, it would appear from that incident and others that even a relatively powerful country such as South Africa has something of a fear-based relationship with Russia. Is Russia then this giant bear on the international scene that African countries should rightly fear? Is that the nature of the power relationship here?
I don't think so. I don't really understand why African countries have to fear Russia. Our policy in Africa traditionally is embedded in the feeling of solidarity. We were very sympathetic in the times of the USSR, and even prior to that, actually, as Russian volunteers fought on the Boer side against British oppression. But after that, we helped a lot all Africans in their struggle against colonialism, racism, and apartheid. And that was not only the military struggle, really, but we also assisted greatly in establishing and developing statehood for the newly independent African nations. And we assisted in providing them some security and in strengthening their sovereignty. You may have heard that hundreds of thousands of African specialists were trained, graduated from different Soviet and Russian higher education institutions. Those are economists, engineers, medics, lawyers, and so on and so forth. And all this was done with full-hearted sympathy to the liberation of the African continent. So why shouldn't Africans trust us or fear us?
There seems to
we never. Yeah. Okay. Well, excuse me. We never took gold or ivory or ebony or whatever resources from Africa. We never took slaves, enslaved Africans, and so on. So I think that this question, if you know history, of course, if one knows history, is pretty easy to answer.
Well, that then brings us to what used to be the Wagner Group, now the Africa Corps. When you speak about minerals and mineral extraction, the impression that we have, certainly that I have, is that Wagner is now an acknowledged arm of the Russian government that is basically being funded and run as a paramilitary group from the Kremlin. And we understand that there are certain deals in place where security services are being swapped exactly for that, for mineral rights, for gold, possibly for ivory. Is that not the case? Is there not that kind of extractive relationship now where security services are being sold pretty much from the Kremlin by one remove in exchange for African resources?
Well, listen, first of all, there is no Wagner Group anymore. So the private military company was terminated last year, and the latest contracts expired early this year. So from any standpoint of view, legal or de facto situation, there is no Wagner anymore. There is, as you called it, an arm of the Ministry of Defense, and it recruits former military personnel in particular, but also some trained personnel from other law enforcement bodies, for example, Russian National Guard and so on. And it does operate under the control of the Russian government, which makes some difference with Wagner Group, which was a 100% pure PMC, private military company. So the services it provides in the area of security are paid services, and they only operate in the countries which governments request them to come. So the government has to address the Russian government and ask for assistance in the area of security, and then maybe one of the possibilities is that this new structure would come into play, and then there is a contract negotiated between the two parties, and as I said, as services are paid services, these two sides may come to a conclusion vis-a-vis pretty different methods of payment, and this is a contractual matter.
How many such, I mean, if we define this as men with guns, if we look at troops or soldiers or people who could effectively be involved in direct combat, as we've seen further north, how many people does Russia have deployed on the African continent? How many people with guns are in various African countries right now?
I cannot answer this question. I simply do not know. Apparently in hundreds, but otherwise I'm not aware.
And would you have any idea of what the overall cost of that service would be? How much African countries are paying for these security services?
Sorry, no idea about that.
Fair enough. Is that the primary relationship that Russia has with African countries? In other words, is Russia a seller of security services, a provider of equipment, weapons, sometimes soldiers, to Africa in return for money. Is that the defining nature of the relationship here?
No, this is just one of the elements. You mentioned the current geopolitical environment, and I think that all answers can be taken from that broader context. And first of all, today we are sympathetic with African countries as to their search of their appropriate place in the modern geopolitical arena. I mean, we are both sides, us and Africans, favor the development of multipolar world. The operators on which are sovereign, genuinely sovereign and independent countries that advance their own interests and that enter into free and fair negotiations with their partners. And we can assist Africans in many ways in this respect. We do cooperate internationally, first of all, in advancing these ideals, in particular through BRICS. It's not just Africa, it's global South in general, global East. There is a new term again. So this is one. But we provide assistance, and we can be very useful to Africans, not, well, relatively young states in many respects. So sovereignty doesn't mean only military security. It doesn't mean only counterterrorism or anti-piracy or anti-criminal measures that can be undertaken. But even security area consists of several other elements. In particular, more and more significance acquires such area as cybersecurity, and we can be of assistance in this area as well, and train specialists and provide hardware and software, develop software, and so on. But also we try to be a stabilizing force internationally on the international markets in terms of food security, energy security, and other areas. So we supply lots of agricultural products, wheat in particular, sometimes mostly on contractual terms. We trade with others, but we also supply some foodstuffs on the for free, like humanitarian assistance in the countries that are in most dire needs of that. And then it is the same for some oil products and also chemicals like fertilizers and so on. So we try to provide this security net for the countries that are most in need of these products, and then develop mutually beneficial ties, trade ties, economic ties with in other areas, in other cases.
Would you have had to do that had you not invaded Ukraine? I mean, we look at Zimbabwe, for instance. You provided free grain and free fertilizer after upsetting the global markets by storming into Ukraine, and thus, causing the situation that you are then alleviating. I mean, you're talking about being a stabilizing force for African countries. It certainly seems that globally, Russia is a deep stabilizing force, and perhaps intentionally so. Sometimes it seems like Russia likes to keep the world in a state of some chaos.
Not at all. I vigorously deny this, and I will try to prove it to you. First of all, Russia, in the last few years, Russia has been a wheat supplier, grain supplier on the world market #1. Now, that depends upon, of course, many factors, including climate conditions, because climate in Russia is not favorable for agriculture, and we have big fluctuations in yields. For example, several years in a row, we had very high yields, but this year would be somewhat different. So please do not blame it on bad political will of the Russian leadership. But this year we will have to curtail perhaps our shipments, international shipments of agricultural products, first of all, because of unfavorable weather conditions. But the price hikes on grain markets, on international grain market and oil market occurred, first of all, not because Russia manipulated something, trying to sow chaos, as you said, but primarily the reason was that during the COVID pandemic, many governments, first of all in the West, and you've certainly read that, you know that, and perhaps listeners remember that, that U.S. government, European Central Bank governments, and in Japan, they have printed money in order to support people during the very lengthy lockdowns. And dollars and yens and euros were printed in trillions, not in billions, in trillions. And those money were not backed by any kind of goods or services provided. It was just, paper money. It was not provided by anything. So these trillions trickled down, and people wanted to have something for instead of these paper money, and they went to commodities markets. This is how price hikes happened internationally. And then if you take separately natural gas market in Europe, for example, the price hikes took place in fall 2021, about half a year prior to the special military operation. And then I will switch to Ukraine, and we can discuss this topic as well. So that in Europe in particular, that was a poor management of this market, economically unsound, wrong decisions vis-a-vis the vis-a-vis market of natural gas. And I can again explain this in some detail, because Gazprom, since 70s, 80s, early 80s, perhaps, had very long contracts on supplying gas with many European countries, 20, 25 years old, and sometimes more. But European Commission said this is not the market regulation, market price regulation. This is wrong. So the prices for natural gas deliveries should be directed by the spot market, and the spot market reacted accordingly. Many of these long-standing contracts were terminated or expired simply. New ones were not concluded, and the spot market dictated basically what happened. And again, the very high prices for natural gas in Europe, they began many months prior to the special military operation in Ukraine. But it is the same with the grain market, and if you follow the trends, see the graphs, for example, the tables that are available on the internet, just Google it, you will see that there were some hikes, some influence by the certain elements of the special military operation on the Black Sea. But in general, there is no correlation between market price for wheat and the conflict in Ukraine. The trends, the price trends on the markets are completely detached from these events. So we come to this role of stabilizing, like our stabilizing effort. Yes, we do our best to stabilize the prices, not to create some kind of disturbance on international markets. And then we can discuss Ukraine if you wish to.
Let's talk about Ukraine at this point, because of course what you refer to as a special operation is an invasion of a country which triggered a proxy war with NATO. I think if we go onto the streets of Berlin or Moscow at the moment and we talk to people, they'll have the sense that Russia is effectively at war with NATO, despite the fact that it's, you know, not a direct confrontation. That was a choice made by Russia that changed the world in many ways. I suspect that you will disagree with that. So let's just start with that. Did Russia look at the world and go, you know what, it's time for us to shake things up a bit? And was that at the root of the invasion of Ukraine? Did you foresee the consequences on African countries in this conversation of that decision?
Well, first of all, again, I assume there is, if there are, if African countries feel some effects, it's like a fallout from what's going on international markets. It's not the fallout from the conflict in Ukraine exactly. And that was proven in particular through analyzing the situation with the Black Sea grain deal that was concluded with the mediation of UN between Russia and Ukraine, but with mediation of the United Nations and Turkey. And that grain that was allowed to be taken away through the Black Sea, by commercial navigation in the Black Sea, only 3% went to African countries. That was, a pure propaganda. So Africans were not supposed to receive this grain, and they did not. That grain went mostly to the developed countries, like 75% or so. So there is no fallout, no consequences for African countries from that. On the contrary, some of the cargo ships carrying Russian grain and fertilizers were sanctioned and arrested in the European ports. And those cargoes, those shipments, were mostly destined for the developing countries, for African countries in particular. And these shipments had to remain for many, many months in the European ports. So despite all the statements to the contrary, in fact, some damage has been produced by those actions, those unilateral actions, which are illegal under international law. What else?
Well, we seem to be heading back quickly to a Cold War status quo now, and African countries know what that means. It means that they have to choose between the West and Russia. Is that the case? Because I wonder if Russia is making a solid case for African countries when put before that choice to choose Russia over the likes of the USA.
Okay. Well, this is not our policy. We are not attempting to make any country choose between us and the West, just Russia and the West, or Russia and China and the West, or BRICS and the West, or whatever. We do not divide that. This is not our mentality. This is not a fundamental consideration for our policies, unlike it is in the West. You remember how this appeared. You remember George Bush, who said, in the context of early stages of fighting terrorism. He said that you are either with us or against us. We never put our partners in front of that very stringent dichotomy. We try not to make them choose. Actually, the same choice, very tough choice, was completely artificially, to our mind, put before Ukrainians prior to the 2013 events. Ukrainians were in the free trade, it's not exactly free trade agreement, but that was customs-free agreement with the CIS states. And they also wanted such an agreement with the European Union. And this is how the whole thing started, when we said, listen, we have to reconcile the two regimes because they are not 100% compatible. Before you enter into agreement with the European Union, we have to review the same agreement that you already have in force with Russia. And President Yanukovych agreed with that, and he said, let's postpone a little bit. Let's defer with the signing of the agreement with the European Union. And that sparked the European pro-Western forces really to start the Maidan protests that degenerated and culminated in the coup d'etat in February 2014. So we never thought, and we are absolutely convinced now, that this is not the right way to proceed in international relations. We've been telling our European partners, in particular, former partners, that there is no contradiction why Ukraine cannot have profitable trade relationship both with Russia and the European Union. But the answer was no. They have to make a choice. Ukrainians were told it's either you're with Russia or you are with the European Union. For some reason, that was the case. So we are not in favor of such approach. We never operate on that basis. And then, of course, you have mentioned that we are in a kind of a Cold War situation right now. Unfortunately, I have to agree with you. But again, this is not our choice, because what's happening, in particular, in the situation between Russia and Ukraine, has to be analyzed from a broader perspective. It is from, geopolitical perspective. It is the situation, we are in the situation in the world, which is defined mostly by one dominant trend, and that is the world is moving from unipolarity to multipolarity. It is already, to a large extent, multipolar. But the West, which is primarily United States of America, who got used to, in the last 30 years, to enjoy this unchallenged position of the only superpower, have big difficulties in saying goodbye to this unique situation. The West is not the whole world, actually. We have a very good relationship with the many states in the global South and global East. And the West is the world's minority now. Let's get used to this thought and to this new reality. And people in the West, first of all, have to get used to this. But of course, they strive to preserve this monopolistic situation in the world for themselves for as long as possible. And they are ready to sacrifice many things for that, especially, of course, Ukrainian lives, who do not matter anything to them. It's there are many quotations from American leaders, Western leaders in general, from which it becomes clear that Ukrainian lives do not matter for them. Like, the best investment so far that they had made was in Ukraine in this conflict with Russia. That's the best investment.
Ambassador, I want to come back to the issue of choices, but we do need to talk about that first. It would appear that Russia is not too concerned with either Russian or Ukrainian lives. I mean, this is a war of aggression from Russia. This is being driven from Russia. The deaths, I think, on both sides can fairly be laid almost entirely at the door of Russia. So is it then not fair to say that it's Russia which is happily spending human lives in the pursuit of its own geopolitical interests in Ukraine?
No, not at all. That wasn't our choice. We were compelled to do this. The whole situation was constructed. It was thoroughly constructed for many years, maybe several decades, beginning in perhaps in the early 90s, after the fall of the USSR in 1991. And there are several factors to that, and that was a premeditated policy. This is a long conversation, though, but you have to take into account that the situation developed for many years, and if you do know history, if you take into account this historical context, at least from 2014, though problems that are at the source of this situation go much farther in history. But at least beginning with the situation 2013, 2014, the coup d'etat of 2014, one could understand that there were reasons, very serious reasons, compelling reasons for us to begin this military operation. It's not a war. This is not a war, definitely. By the way, Ukrainians themselves have not declared war on the Russian Federation. Think about it. And this is also for some reasons. But if that were war, Ukrainians wouldn't be sitting in the restaurants and cafes in Kiev, and their leaders wouldn't be walking around the city and traveling abroad and all this stuff. Our goals are very clearly defined and limited in this situation. So this is a special military operation. It's not war. It's not about territory. It's not about, regime change or something else. But you see, we can speak about these reasons, and the oppression of the Russian minority in Ukraine in the last decade is just a triggering event. And 12 to 14,000 Ukrainian citizens, by the way, but ethnic Russians mostly, killed in eastern Ukraine since 2014 is just the triggering event for this special military operation.
Ambassador, it's very easy for us to talk only about Ukraine, and I'm tempted to do that because it is interesting. I have to tell you, only a career diplomat can look at what's happening in Ukraine and say it's not a war. I think that's the epitome of diplomatic language right there. The reason we on the African continent, though, are interested in Ukraine is because of the impact that it has at home. And one of that is I hear you say that Russia does not make countries choose, but you yourself have pressured South Africa to step back from what South Africa considers a neutral position on Ukraine. You've made it very clear that you will only allow, your country has said that Ukraine has effectively to be demilitarized. So you are forcing those choices. I mean, I do think you're putting various countries in a position where they have to choose, whereas you seem to be saying, well, these are all external forces, or it's conspiracy from the West. Let's talk about South Africa that both you and I are perhaps best acquainted with. Is Russia satisfied with the South African official policy of being neutral and hosting a Russian warship this week and having military exercises with NATO countries next week?
Yes, we are satisfied.
You will not ask South Africa to take on a stance on Ukraine which is more supportive of the Russian position, for instance, than its current one.
Well, we hope that, and we expect that it could be more supportive. Yes, but we understand what we've been told by South African government in this respect. Yes, we respect that position.
Let's come at that from the other side then, perhaps. Not the US government, not the White House, but certainly the US Senate has made it clear that it would like countries like South Africa and other African countries to make a choice. They're talking about yanking AGOA benefits, kind of like turning off the taps of trade unless African countries take a firm stance against Russia and against at least Russia's adventures elsewhere in the world. Should that happen, I mean, should we see a Donald Trump presidency and we should see AGOA being shut down for countries that don't come out and declare themselves opposed to Russia, can Russia step up there? Can it fill in that huge gap in trade that will be left? Can it actually, as you say, be a stabilizing force and help with the poverty and the hunger that would follow should Western trade just suddenly decline in Africa?
Well, my dear host, you just said it yourself, that it's the American Congress, Senate, is asking South Africa to make a choice. So it's not us, yet again. It's their politics. They are asking others to make a choice. We do not see why can't we do business and live in peace all together. And then again, what do you mean? How did you put it? The Russian adventures around the world? What do you mean by that? Can you please specify?
Certainly. Well, let's start with we can talk about the misinformation apparatus that your government operates. We can talk about the Sahel and places slightly further north. Certainly, Ukraine comes into that. So, should African countries be put in a position where they must choose? Let's say it comes at the hands of NATO countries. NATO takes a resolution and they say, "The friend of our enemy is our enemy." I mean, would you fairly expect African countries to choose Russia in that context? The relatively smaller economic power, the much smaller trading partner. If African countries have to choose on the basis of their own most important pressing issues, poverty and hunger, should they then not choose the USA over Russia ultimately?
Well, there are so many things I would like to object to in what you've said. Again, I was trying to explain to you the situation around Ukraine and what were our reasons for that. You didn't wish to listen. But you're following exactly the pattern of the Western propaganda, unfortunately, to the narrative of the world media in this. And they say, world war of aggression, unprovoked, unjustified aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So forget about the history, forget about the coup d'etat 2014, forget about the Minsk agreements. Actually, it's the 10th anniversary today of the Minsk I, so-called Minsk I. The first package, the protocol of Minsk, was signed exactly on the 5th of September in 2014. And then there was a package of like a roadmap to implement these measures half a year later in March 2015. And we agreed to do the peaceful settlement, and we mediated between Ukraine and Donbas People's Republic and Lugansk People's Republic. And the Minsk tour package was adopted by the UN Security Council. And then we have heard from President Poroshenko, Ukrainian then president, from President Francois Hollande, and from Chancellor Merkel, that Minsk agreements were designed just to make a pause and to give Ukraine time, and to give time to its allies, in NATO allies in particular, to arm and to get ready its force in order to attack Russia. Well, let's be objective here. You're following just one side of the narrative, and then what else? In Sahel, there are obvious results. The situation, the security situation, is much better than it was when the French were carrying out their Serval operation. And local population, local governments acknowledge that. So please, why aren't you talking about American adventures, Western adventures around the world? The regime change, the colored revolutions, those are real adventures. 800,000 to 1 million Iraqis exterminated by US.
Well, let's talk about the Sahel for a moment. You refer often to what you call the coup in Ukraine, and you refer to that in the context of Russia's hand being forced, because of course an undemocratic change of government is not good for anyone. I think we can agree. In the Sahel, your country seems to be very happy to work with coup governments. It has been accused of actually fomenting coups and helping destabilize that region. Why is it that you're very comfortable working with those non-democratic governments? Is that something that should concern all of the rest of Africa, this kind of cozying up to military dictatorships?
Well, how do you know how happy exactly is my government working with them? Why do you use these words? Yes, we do work with them because we think that these governments are representative, that they act in the best interests of the peoples of their countries. Now, of course, we do not support unconstitutional change of government. We do not do this. We do not assist that. We do not encourage that in any way, unlike the other side, adventures of which you do not like to mention. But there was a request from de facto governments, if you would like to call them that, the effective governments in these countries, and we do assist them in fighting internationally recognized terrorist and extremist groups. The security situation in these states, countries improves, and this is what local population recognize, and population and governments of the neighboring countries recognize. Then you can look at it from a different angle, from the colonial and neo-colonial perspective. And we have to admit then that the changes of governments were driven mostly by anti-French sentiments that are very strong in this part of the world for some apparent reason. Those are former colonies who experience also the strangulating effects of Afrique policies, and that local populations vigorously protest. So one may look at it from this perspective and maybe think about assess these situations as anti-neo-colonial move in certain states, and so on. So it's not necessarily that they are juntas, whatever the pronunciation is, and we assist in the local populations with its primary needs, and the primary need is security in these countries. And the whole situation in Sahel actually happened as a consequence of the adventures of our Western former partners, in particular NATO, that bombed Libya, murdered its legitimate president Gaddafi, destroyed the Libyan state, dissipated its military forces, and so on. And hence, all kinds of extremists with lots of arms spread into this region. And that was the initial push for this very, very bad security situation in Sahel, which we now help to improve.
Does that improvement extend to helping those coup governments move back towards democracy? Has Russia gone to these partners and said, we believe that you need to return to democratic government. We would like to see a roadmap towards that. We would like to extend our help in getting there. Is a drive towards democracy in the Sahel part of Russia's strategic intent?
We will certainly support elections in these countries when the time is ripe for that and when they decide for this, to have them.
More broadly, perhaps on that, many of us, certainly I believe that the great powers have an obligation in terms of human rights and in terms of human suffering, that if you're a great power, as Russia, I think objectively is, and as it considers itself, if you're a player at that level on the international stage, then alleviating human suffering is part of it. But, in the longer run, unless you help establish human rights, you will not eradicate human suffering. Is that part of Russia's strategic objectives on the African continent? Do you wish to support a culture of human rights on the continent?
We do not impose any political conditions to our assistance, in particular to African countries. We accept the governments in different countries as they are chosen by the population, and we do not condition any kind of interaction by in particular human rights considerations. Every society is different, and there are historical traditions and historical differences in different parts of the world, and we have to respect that. We have to respect that every nation, every state, more or less, has its own traditions that may go back in history for thousands of years. And for every particularity, every feature, social, political, economic, there is a reason that may be covered by centuries. So we do respect the culture, the traditions of other people, and this is the strength, actually, of the emerging multipolar world, and some organizations like BRICS that sort of preempt this new multipolar world.
I think one of the reasons Russia is such an enigma to us is because we don't understand your approach to soft power. I mean, we understand that the United States uses its cultural dominance and it reaches out in terms of health and well-being of populations. Even China teaches Mandarin on the continent, and it has its institutes kind of expanding cultural interaction. The closest thing on the Russian side seems to be nuclear cooperation. Is there a soft power approach from Russia? Does Russia wish to extend kind of cultural ties to African nations, or is it more, I guess you could use the word mercenary, but more transactional? Is it more about the trade for you than it is about soft power?
Oh, it is. You're right in the sense that there must be an interest in exercising some soft power, globally. Every country is interested in, first of all, its neighbors, but also other countries in the world in general, to better know and to better understand it. And yes, we do what we can in the current conditions to have other countries interested in Russian culture, in studying, learning Russian language, people learning Russian language, and so on. But we will not impose anything on anybody in that sense, just as we do not impose it in general. So we can encourage this or that action, like in particular today, the days of spiritual Russian culture kick off in South Africa, and there will be a concert by one of the best chamber orchestra in the world, with the leadership of Yuri Bashmet, in Johannesburg, and then they will move to Durban to have another one day after tomorrow. There is a Russian spiritual choir which will perform soon here as well, and so on. So we invite others to better know our culture, our traditions, our history, first of all.
I want to talk to you about de-dollarization briefly. Russia is very keen to de-dollarize trade, to set up alternative trade and financing mechanisms. And given the context in which that's happening, it often sounds as if it's a way to avoid Western sanctions, which raises the question: if the likes of South Africa gets involved in a Russian financial network, does it basically become a conduit for Russian trade? Do African countries become proxy fronts for Russian trade? And is this all about sanctions busting?
Well, we do try to de-dollarize our economy, first of all, nationally. And that was the effort that spans already for quite some time. But we also want to de-dollarize our relationship, economic relationship with other countries, trade, first of all, apparently. In order to make this relationship more immune, better immune towards the possible sanctioning. Now, again, you see the dollar and trade relationship, economic relationship, has been weaponized by the West. Of course, we are accused of doing that, but we're trying just to get rid of this possibility for the West to influence our trade and economic relationship with other countries. Russian trade here is already more than 90% de-dollarized. And with countries like China, there's very little, small percentage left to de-dollarize. And the world in general, the global South, the global East, are moving away from a dollar and euro and other Western currencies as global reserve currencies, if they can be considered so. So, yes, we would like to have to be more secure in our economic relationship. If you trade in dollars, not only you're paying from every transaction to US, but you're also vulnerable to so-called secondary sanctions, in particular against Russia or against Iran or against North Korea, and so on. I think that such an extensive use of economic sanctions as coercive measures internationally paid a very bad service to the United States and to the Western world in general. As now more and more states, more and more leaders, people try to avoid to to do business and express its value in dollars or in euro. So again, it's an objective. Former Western partners have started that themselves. For our trade with other countries, actually, we can offer some our achievements. We can share them in some areas, in particular with African countries. And again, it's agriculture, energy, mining, and so on, and in particular in nuclear energy as well.
Russia's approach to nuclear energy has, of course, been interesting in South Africa, particularly. Russia seems to be offering kind of a unique global service of end-to-end management, from constructing the reactors right through to providing fuel and then taking the spent fuel away again. Some people have suggested that that's a great way to keep countries tethered to Russia. In other words, to create kind of a power imbalance there, where say a South Africa becomes dependent on Russia's supply of nuclear fuel. Is that a fair characterization of Rosatom's approach on the continent?
Well, South Africa has already a nuclear power plant not far from Cape Town. Does it make you so much dependent from France? Who built it? Whose technologies were used in it?
The approach that we see from a lot of other suppliers in many other areas, and I guess nuclear energy is just the most prominent one here, is kind of a build, operate, and transfer mode. A lot of countries will certainly talk, I don't know if they'll follow through on it, but they'll talk about building local capacity and developing local expertise. Not really the kind of approach that we typically hear from either China or Russia, though.
Oh, well, it depends. It's all negotiable. It depends upon particular circumstances. Right now, at this very moment, we are building several big block NPPs, in particular in China, in India, in Turkey, and in Egypt. And there are plans for others. We had some NPPs in a number of European countries. So, I mean, those countries do not seem to be so hesitant or afraid of Russian influence being exercised through nuclear technologies. To the contrary, I think that having more leeway in terms of operating with energy, flows of energy inside the country is quite beneficial for the economy and the population, actually, of the countries. And again, this is for the record. I know that everything is for the record, of course. But our nuclear technologies are the best.
Ambassador, we're essentially out of time. I do want to put to you that when we talk about African countries fearing or mistrusting Russia, we have a great deal of evidence that there is misinformation operations being conducted out of Russia that targets not only American elections and European elections, but also African countries. Would you care to respond to all of this evidence that Russia likes to use misinformation as a tool in its arsenal, and that being the kind of the very solid suspicion? Why is it that African countries should then trust anything Russia says or does?
Well, I don't know how much time I have, but first of all, I do not see any solid evidence about that. That there is no such things emanating from Russia, and every country every people should decide for themselves whether they trust Russia or not. Again, go back into history and decide for yourselves. What was the role of Russia in general, of the Russian Federation, Soviet Union, Russian Empire on the African continent, and what did others do? So I'm really perplexed by the way you put it, that there is solid evidence and so on and so on. I mean, what I observe is the contrary.
Ambassador, thank you. That is as much time as we have. Ambassador Ilya Igorovich Rogachev, I should have mentioned a very accomplished diplomat of many decades and very diplomatic
Thank you
way
very much.
of putting it. I'm Philip de Wet. This is News 24. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you soon
Thank you for your interest. Thank you.
on the great powers and their intentions towards Africa.